Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Steve from Rare Gamer. There's an intro.
yeah, Steve from off of Rare Gamer. And if Steve is here, it either means we're talking about rare cows or we're talking about Stop N Swop. I know you've been here for other things, but generally, those are the two things I know you for. Well, I guess I need 5 things that I know you for in order to properly know you. Welcome back to the show, Steve.
Thanks for having me on again to discuss this, the most, epic of topics in Rare's fandom. More than cows, more than perfect dark cheese, it's Stop N Swop, baby.
Yeah, and we did a duology of Stop N Swop episodes back in seasons 8 and 9 of the Kongversation. We did Stop N Swop, a history in season 8, and we did Stop N Swop, a revelation, almost 2 years ago in season 9. And, when you do 2 of anything, people are always going to ask, where's the third? Can we make it a trilogy? And thankfully, yes, because of your due diligence, we now have enough talking points to go off of to squeeze a little bit more discussion out of the Stop N Swop sponge. Here we are with Stop N Swop, a summation.
Exactly. And we've used the Matrix reference before in terms of the previous episode. So this is our Revolutions episode after, Reloaded. So I'm hoping it's a little bit better, in terms of quality, but, it's all going to be bullet time there and everything, we'll get it through it.
Well, speaking of due diligence, I do want to quickly plug a couple of things, including DK Vine's merchandise store, which you can find at dkvine.com/merchandise. Now, I bring this up because, we have a t-shirt for sale right now on our store that honors and celebrates the very concept of Stop N Swop. It's called Don't Stop Till You Swap Enough. And it's a little fun t-shirt that it provides a checklist for any forgetful gamer in search of a fabled ice key and some question mark eggs. I'm actually wearing it right now. In fact, it's all I'm wearing. So I love this. Yeah, I love this shirt. It's always nice to remind myself that yes, there are 2 question mark eggs in Mad Monster Mansion. I'm not losing my mind. So you can find that as well as all of our great shirts because we have so many just fantastic top tier fashion statements at dkvine.com/merchandise, or you can just find us on TeePublic. I also want to plug our Patreon at dkvine.com/Patreon, or you can find us on Patreon. We had a big episode last week about the missing, or I should say abandoned Donkey Kong game from 2016. We divulged all the details on there. It was independent Donkey Kong journalism at its finest, and it's all thanks to you, our lovely patrons. So if you like what we do, if you're like, finally, there's somebody just dedicating their life to the DKU, then, throw $1 or $2 a month our way and we can provide you even better coverage. I'm not sure how, but I'll figure it out. That's at dkvine.com/Patreon. Now, Steve, you got a website.
I do indeed. It's called raregamer.co.uk. It's a Canadian run, but English owned. Figure that one out. Website. And it talks all about Rare stuff, including every game they've ever made from all the way back in 1983, starting with Jetpack to our current Sea of Thieves offerings, and even future stuff that is kind of outside Rare's purview, like Perfect Dark and stuff like that. So, Yeah, that's what we do, whereas Donkey Kong is following the golden bananas that Donkey Kong has left behind with, forages into like Retro Studios and Playtonic and things like that. We've followed very steadfast to Rare, so any of their games we've always been attached to there, so.
We sometimes get confused people coming our way because they don't understand how something like Mighty Fight Federation connects to Donkey Kong. And I'm like, well, it's because ukulele are in it. Well, how does that connect to Donkey Kong? Oh, it's because an ambiguous goldfish was in it that was clearly intended to be Royston. Who's Royston?
Yeah.
All right. Just stop because I don't want to talk to you anymore. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, Rare Gamer, check it out. You can also find that on the drop-down menu of DK Vine. So you don't even need to type in that .co.uk nonsense. You can just clicky click.
There you go.
So Steve, as I mentioned, we had a big episode last week. Josh Wallen, the Geek Critique, and I discussed Donkey Kong Freedom, which was Vicarious Visions' Donkey Kong game, post-Tropical Freeze, that was eventually scuttled when the Bala brothers left the studio, and Nintendo reportedly took development of Donkey Kong back home internally. I say this, though, because we got a lot of new ears listening to the Kongversation for the very first time, and people might be tuning back in this week who aren't up to speed on the machinations and Paul Macachekinations of Stop N Swop, which, of course, you mentioned at the top of the show that it is one of the most legendary things for Rare fandom, for DKU fandom. It really is in the center of that Venn diagram. But a lot of people may not know the finer points of it, where it goes so much beyond just an ice key and 2 question mark eggs that were supposed to be taken from Banjo-Kazooie into Banjo-Tooie. So really quick, I thought we should catch people up, because I did say, listen to those 2 episodes from seasons 8 and 9, but what is the quick Cliff Notes version of Stop N Swop? What we know before we do this episode, what we've learned thus far.
Yes. So here comes 5 hours in 30 seconds. So yeah, what we know about Stop N Swop: in 1998, Rare released a video game called Banjo-Kazooie, and
slow
hidden
down,
in
slow
the
down.
game.
I gotta take notes here. Banjo-Kazooie, what now?
Yeah, it's the Rare game, Banjo-Kazooie. And within the game, hidden there was a couple of mysterious items. We knew about 2 and an ice key. So there was 2 mystery eggs and an ice key. And we were told, hey, in the future, you're going to find the sequel, Banjo-Tooie. You're going to play in that game. You're going to be able to come back to Banjo-Kazooie and find these 2 items, or these 3 items now, I guess, the ice key and the eggs, and you're going to be able to use them in the next game. And as far as we know back in the day, that's as much as we knew. And Banjo-Tooie came out, and then it just stopped dead. We didn't get to connect. It was just odd. Rare would do many connect things later on, but for this, spot, we had nothing to go on. So data miners, as we called them, I guess now, but hackers back in the day, explored the code of Banjo-Kazooie, and we found out there's actually 7 total items. So there's going to be 6 eggs and a key. And we had this thing called Stop N Swop, which we found in the menu. And Rare's initial plan was that you were going to remove the cartridge of Banjo-Kazooie in the middle of play, put in Banjo-Tooie, use some, secret finagling code there, come back to Banjo-Kazooie after you've done certain things in the sequel, and then you'd be able to collect these mysterious items that were hidden, that you weren't able to gain access to. So, through that method, once we found out, the foundation of Stop N Swop, we then discovered, oh my god, it goes even deeper, because Rare didn't intend to just have Banjo-Tooie and Banjo-Kazooie communicating with each other. It was pretty much the latter era of their N64 library. They wanted every single game to kind of tap into this, secret feature. So that's what we discussed in the first episode. The second episode came about because Paul Macachek very graciously uploaded on Twitter a memo from Nintendo that they had sent in 1999 during the development of Donkey Kong 64, which Hyle and I had a huge laugh over it, because it's just this, 11th hour panic talking about, oh my god, take this out. What are you doing? If you're telling people to rip cartridges out, that'll damage the game, damage the console, lock up everything. Pandemonium.
Just to clarify Nintendo's panic here, this memo was from October 1999, I believe.
Yes. October 1st, yeah.
Yeah, very, very close to Donkey Kong 64. The cartridges entering production, because that would ship November 22nd, or that would be in stores November 22nd, 1999. Not even shipping.
Yeah, which meant they had to manufacture them. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there was just this cold flop sweat from Nintendo. And if you ever sat on the sidelines and imagined what Rare's relationship with Nintendo was, this seems pretty accurate, where like, you know, Rare would always walk up to the line and maybe tiptoe over it, and Nintendo would be like, what are you doing? Stop, go back. And this very much clearly illustrated that relationship. Hilarious stuff. Really, I can't believe Paul uploaded it. It just seems like it's not for our eyes, but I made sure I saved it. Because I was like, you know, especially now with Twitter in a question mark of its own, not an egg, but more of a flaming dumpster fire. It's like, I'm glad to preserve this little bit of gaming history, because that's what it is. I mean, it is a vital document to understand why Stop and Swap was given the axe, especially when Banjo-Kazooie, the end of the game, basically promised that you would be able to connect via magic or some such with Banjo-Tooie. Exactly. But it was Donkey Kong 64 that broke it entirely, because Nintendo realized, wait, what have you been promising?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the kind of the conclusion of our second episode. We talked a bit about the mysteries, and we'll go more in depth of what those specifically were, but that was pretty much it as we knew it at the time. And we just ended off that episode going, Hyle, great duology. We did it. We've summarized this in 5 hours. This is fantastic. And then, of course, as time continues to make fools of us all, it wasn't Paul Makachek that blew the cover off, but it wasn't even something in our own language that gave us the Rosetta Stone to translate this next bit. So we'll definitely get into that.
So I do want to recommend those 2 episodes for anybody who's really interested in Stop and Swap, but doesn't quite understand the minutia of what we know thus far, because it really is astounding to me, you know, the master plan that basically not every game, but most games, most Rare games on the N64, starting with Banjo-Kazooie, would have some sort of connection, some sort of link where you could kick these items back and forth and unlock different stuff. And we hypothesized what those games would be, but it's just, it's mind-reeling, because we talk about the DKU, you know, how Diddy Kong Racing really launched the Donkey Kong universe, introducing Banjo and Conker before their own games, you know, sort of smuggling them in as friends of Diddy Kong. And, you know, there's those strong thematic connections between Banjo-Kazooie, Conker, and Donkey Kong. But this would have gone even further than that. You know, potentially Perfect Dark, potentially Dinosaur Planet. We debated back and forth what the games would actually be, but it's just really exciting for fans of that era to imagine how it would have all connected. And it makes Stop and Swap, which is already this sort of grand conspiracy theory among Rare fans, all the more impactful. So definitely listen to those 2 episodes of the Kongversation. You can find them on YouTube, you can find them on SoundCloud, or you can find them on your preferred podcast listening network. Before we get into the new stuff, though, we do have a call this week that I want to play. So why don't we listen to it and see if it guides us in our summation and our third entry of the Stop and Swap trilogy.
Hey, DK Vine, it's Ray Pinball calling about Stop and Swap. Oh man, this was the thing growing up. This is what got me to use the internet to figure out what those dang ice keys, ice key and question mark eggs are for, and stumbled upon the Rare Witch Project back in the day. I used to post on there a lot. Yeah, just so much to talk about Stop and Swap. But what I really want to talk about is somehow there was an article or something that said that Banjo-Kazooie is still, to this day, constantly monitoring the memory addresses for the Stop and Swap items, or rather, it is constantly writing to memory, like a specific spot in the RAM saying, hey, he has this item, or something over and over again, so that should Banjo-Tooie be swapped in, that memory would be there upon power down. But then I also heard that Banjo-Kazooie is also constantly, or on boot, would read from these memory items, so that should you play Banjo-Tooie, take it out, put in Banjo-Kazooie, and start Banjo-Kazooie, it would see that you had Banjo-Tooie and then unlock all of the Stop and Swap items. Now my question is that functionality actually still in the game, and could you, if you modified a Banjo-Tooie cart or just did something to the state of memory on the N64, could you basically turn on your N64 with Banjo-Kazooie and all of a sudden you have all the Stop and Swipe items without ever using a game shark, without entering Sandcastle codes, basically as log intended for Stop and Swap to work? Could you do that today if you could write to those specific spots in memory on the N64? That was a lot of words. Hopefully it made sense. That would be really cool. Anyway, thanks DK Vine. Love all that you do. Talk to you later.
Well, thank you for the call, Ray Day Pinball. And not to put Ray Day on the spot here, but I do want to congratulate them for winning the IFPA North American Pinball Championship. Ray Day actually won the championship for pinball in all of North America. So that was just a couple weeks ago. Congrats, Ray Day, living up to your surname, Pinball. And now you're here with us talking Stop and Swap. Steve, I will defer to you because I have to be honest, this is the part where my eyes sort of glaze over. Anytime you get into code, I'm just like, all right, well, it's a magic sandcastle. I don't know beyond like the in-universe mechanics of this. This is making my head hurt.
Exactly. When it comes to the Donkey Kong family tree, you can of course point to me whose grandson belongs where, but when it comes to an actual coding tree, it's too much. Yeah, I understand.
Yes.
So for Ray Day's question there, which will be answered this episode, which is very exciting to kind of provide an answer on that. But the interview was with Paul Makachek, and that was actually on my site. And the funny thing about that is you can find it very, very, very easily through DK Vine because Hyle provided a great truncated link to my site. Hyle, do you still have that link?
Yes, Steve, I know exactly what URL you're referring to because it's dkvine.com/cheat. With that URL, you will not fight. Use this instead to go to Steve's site. And you just put that in naturally, and it takes you right to this interview you did with Paul Makachek on Stop and Swap.
That's right. So, yeah, on my site, it's a little bit easier to find now. The whole joke of that was Hyle provided me that URL to replace mine, which was very long and very convoluted, more so than Hyle's was. But now, if you go to my site, raregamer.co.uk, you can go to interviews. And no, I mean the initial joke that we made on the first episode, because I started listing off the URL, which I think, if I recall, it's raregamer.co.uk/Paul-Makachek-interview. Like, it was just this very long URL for the Stop and Swap interview. But now, if you go to my site and you click interviews, it's right at the top there. 2020, it's right there, Paul Makachek. So that was the interview that Ray Day Pinball was talking about. And within that interview, he broke Stop and Swap down completely on a technical level. It was everything from checksums to addresses to where it searches and everything. So graciously, Paul provided all that information through to us there, and it answered a lot of questions on how Stop and Swap was meant to act on a technical level. So huge props to him for revealing that to us there. So, and yeah, so on from that, because, you know, the glazing over bit, I totally understand. There's a website called The Cutting Room Floor where they just exclusively look at behind the scenes stuff, scrap things in games, elements that didn't quite make it. And they provide that on the website almost like Wikipedia. And one of their users there, named Wetarobi, just 2 months after we did our second episode, and about a year after Paul did his interview in April for us, he was able to go through Banjo-Kazooie's code, reverse engineering everything, and trying to find all the payloads and memory and stuff to discover there. And I'm excited to tell, especially Ray Day Pinball here, he found it. He actually found the payloads in memory where Stop and Swap is actually meant to function. And by altering those bits in memory, we can actually cause Stop and Swap to occur naturally in Banjo-Kazooie completely as intended. So, I've provided a bit of an explanation on this one in our show notes, Hyle. Do you want to read off some of it, or would you rather just me geek out and it's complete being nerdy?
When we get to the more tangible stuff, I think I will participate. I want you to teach me, Steve, because I don't feel like I have any authoritative voice here whatsoever when getting into the nerdy, techie stuff, as you described it.
Okay, that's fair enough. So basically, yeah, for the uninitiated, when you turn on Banjo-Kazooie for the first time, just as it boots and it's loading everything that's about to happen in the introduction cutscene of the game, it checks memory. It starts scanning it for a series of it's called valid checksums, right? So basically what'll happen is it finds this one area in memory called C908C52F. And when it scans that memory, it asks the game, hey, is there anything written here? And by default, it should say 0000 and then followed by 0000. And that should, in theory, happen every single time that anybody turns on Banjo-Kazooie, especially because Stop and Swap was removed after Banjo-Kazooie came out. So it can receive no input information. It can only output things. So because it's always looking for that number and never getting it, your game will never change, in theory, by playing Banjo-Kazooie or any of Rare's future titles. It's never going to alter that. But he ended up finding that the last 4 zeros in that list, the first 4 are checksum digits that are just there for padding. So they're always going to say 0000. But the second 4 digits can actually change. And if you can alter that, that's when some really exciting stuff happens. So if that, for instance, if that digit is changed to 010C, it tells the game, hey, here's a valid checksum. The game goes, thank you very much for that. I'm now going to make the Shark Food Island area in Treasure Trove Cove raise out of the water so that they can properly get that item. So that's what he ended up finding there. And yes, to answer Ray Day Pinball's question there, if you can alter those items, absolutely you can legitimately unlock anything there. And presumably the way that it was supposed to work, just to give this whole plan in action, in Banjo-Tooie, you would go, I'm presuming here, to Captain Black-Eye, where all those pink egg portraits actually are. And you would discuss with him, or you'd, have some kind of interaction, at which point the game would then say, hey, we need to write something to the memory using Banjo-Tooie. So in this case, it's writing 010C from Banjo-Tooie, and it's just putting that in memory. Once you cut the power, whether you're cold swapping or hot swapping, once the Banjo-Tooie cartridge is removed, you would then slam in Banjo-Kazooie, at which point it would then start scanning and it would go, oh, I see 010C, that means pink egg. You would then go to Treasure Trove Cove, you would go inside Shark Food Island, you'd climb up all the way to the top and probably fall off a few times because we've all been there. You would collect the pink egg, and at that point the game would then, as Ray Day Pinball told us here, it would then start saying over and over the digit, which in this case would be 0104. So it would just be screaming that over and over to the memory. Once you had had that in motion, you then take out Banjo-Kazooie, put in Banjo-Tooie. At that point, the game knows, hey, I've already said 010C to the memory, and now I'm waiting for it to then read 0104. And once it can read that, it goes, yep, it's been transferred. Let's put the pink egg into Banjo-Tooie now.
So just to be clear then, this completely means that the sandcastle codes, which are so heavily associated with this process, both via, what people found, after the fact, and also the way the XBLA versions incorporated it, these sandcastle codes are just completely rendered moot. Like they're not even brought into this.
Yeah. And just because it was meant almost as a backdoor kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like they knew, hey, if we couldn't get this process working, perhaps we could do it another way. And just as assurance, they said, let's do sandcastle code. So that was one of the alternate ways. And I remember, Hyle, you took such ire with this in our first episode because you found out when the sandcastle codes got leaked, you were very, very upset. And you at the point were saying, this isn't how Rare intends us to do this. We shouldn't enter the codes because it probably isn't the way. So I'm going to give you a second here to shout, I knew it, it as loud as possible and have any kind of catharsis that you want. So go right ahead.
No, look, I know I'm always right. It's fine. It's, no, and let me rephrase that. I'm always right when it comes to the DKU. I'm wrong plenty of other places.
Okay. That's fair.
So yeah, like since we last did our second Stop and Swap episode, Banjo-Kazooie for the Nintendo Switch Online was uploaded, and I was able to actually experience getting the ice key and question mark eggs in Banjo-Kazooie without ruining my cartridge, because with the benefit of save states, you can just immediately revert back to before you got them. So it was kind of just this like wonderful little sexual experience for me to finally do something very, very naughty. Not to be confused with the naughty in Click Clock Wood or the naughty, very naughty in Donkey Kong Country. Just something that's very naughty in general. And, I had no consequence. Risk free, right? So, I got to have a taste of it finally on the N64 version, even if it was, on the Switch.
And absolutely. And the other thing too is that to finally end off with Ray Day here too, because he said, is it possible then that we could totally do this? It is on emulation, because you can absolutely, pause the game as soon as it boots and really start altering the memory there. But in theory, this is totally possible on the Nintendo 64, provided that you have a cartridge that will just scream, those checksum values over and over to the memory. So if you're, technically advanced, or somebody that is, and they totally know how, the Nintendo 64 works, maybe with an EverDrive or something like that. If you can get them to give you a cartridge that screams to that, absolutely, unequivocally, yes. You can plug in Banjo-Kazooie, you take it out, you put in your custom cartridge that just screams that same thing over and over, and then you plug in Banjo-Kazooie, you turn it on, and yeah, every location in the game, from, Wuz's Cave to, the Cyan Barrel to the Desert Door, everything will open and it'll allow you to collect it. Now, when you do, it's going to scream all those values back to it. But unfortunately, as of yet, there is nothing that can be unlocked. If you want to, ROM hack Banjo-Tooie and make those actually work, then yeah, we would have Stop and Swap as intended. But because it's lacking that second vital, transfer, we can't transfer, but we can actually unlock and then send them away as completely intended by Rare back in the 90s.
Yeah, and there's no way to really just fundamentally change what the game ended up being. Like, Banjo-Kazooie is one thing, but Banjo-Tooie, which came out after Stop and Swap, was already nixed. You can only do so much there. You can't really, change Captain Black Eye's functionality in the game for him to actually be the facilitator of all of this. But, yeah, in theory, it's neat, I suppose.
So that being said, though, you will now be able to legitimately collect the eggs and the ice key in your virgin cartridge copy of Banjo-Kazooie. So would you, though? That's the question.
No, it's not legitimate. It's still it's still cheating. It's still coming up with trumped up justifications when the true intent is still, at the very least, as promised at the end of Banjo-Kazooie, using the Banjo-Tooie cartridge you own to access the ice key, and at the very least, the pink egg in Shark Food Island in Treasure Trove Cove, and the blue egg in the Desert Door in Gobi's Valley. Anything else beyond that was not promised or guaranteed, so whatever, but no. I'm sorry. It's still not good enough. And, I still hold out hope that one day Rare will release a special edition of Banjo-Tooie for the N64. And,
of course.
And
they'll fire up the factory, eh?
Yeah, you're always seeing these new NES cartridges, like limited run games and whatnot. They're always releasing this stuff. I'm like, how is this possible? How are you doing this? So, you never know. You never know.
And I mean, they recently came out with GoldenEye, so the hope is there. We're still going back to the N64, maybe someday. Get that factory going again. We'll get some cartridges.
all we need is a third party that Rare is affiliated with, like Limited Run, to release a cartridge that makes Stop and Swap actually functionable. Like, I'm not saying it's likely or it's ever going to happen, but I'm saying technically, theoretically, it's possible if they can release Battletoads for the NES, in a new edition in the last couple of years, why not do an N64 cartridge for Banjo-Tooie?
So as we do have the checksum list, should we read those out just in case people haven't heard the previous episodes and they're like, what are these 7 mysterious items? Should we just kind of take turns reading out the checklist or the checksum rather?
Sure. So this is these are the actual numerical amounts that would activate these.
Do you want to start with the yellow?
So 0108 it makes the yellow egg appear on Nabnut's table.
So you go 1 digit up, you get 0109. That's the red egg that appears in the captain's cabin.
Okay, and then it goes to letters. It goes 010A. The green egg will pop on Lago's tank.
And if you do 010B, that opens up Gobi's door for the blue egg in Gobi's Valley.
Okay, all right. And then if you make that a C, it raises Shark Food Island for the pink egg. C for the sea.
Ah, that's what the whole list is based on. That's why it's ordered this way with the use X. 010D. It's the contested cyan egg in the basement of Mad Monster Mansion there in the cellar. So that opens up the wine barrel that you can get the cyan egg.
Why is it contested?
Because Grab by the Ghoulies. Oh my God! Now we're getting in the rabbit hole. In 2003, Rare released Grab by the Ghoulies, and it made it seem like only 4 of the eggs were valid out of the 6. And because of that, people were investigating which eggs would be valid, and they said, "Well, Mad Monster Mansion has X. There's an X over the barrel. Clearly, that means we're not supposed to collect it." And Rare did nothing but laugh and laugh.
Well, that's silly to me because there's actually an environment for the egg behind the wine barrel. Aside from the desert door and Shark Food Island, it's the only place where there's a new environment built in just for the egg. And that makes more sense to me than an egg plopping down on the toilet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. So, and then finally E will break Waz's ice wall, or maybe melt it. I don't know what it actually does, since we never actually see the animation for it giving way, but the ice wall will disappear, and you can go down the tunnel to get the ice key in Waz's cave.
And then for all those codes, because it's interesting that it starts at 8 and goes 9, the reason it goes to A is because you're going to the next value up, and there's other things in memory that would, take up the space of 011 something or other. But, from 100 to then 106, so we're actually going before that list. This is all the stuff. Once you collect an egg, everybody who has ever played Banjo-Kazooie and collected the items would have this valid checksum. So when you do like the yellow egg, that's, 0100, and then it's ready to completely swap. And that goes right to 0106 for the ice keys. So everybody's experienced those, and those will happen automatically. You will not have to hack the game in any, size or form or whatever. It's all ready to go once you've collected.
So even if you collect them via the Sandcastle codes on the N64, the codes would still be valid.
Exactly.
Okay, because there was debate about, would there be some sort of lockout if you get them incorrectly, which is a silly thing to argue about now, considering, none of the games plan to be a part of this ever actually utilized it post Banjo-Kazooie. But there was that fear that the game would know, that you got them through some sort of back door.
No, as long as you have them in the inventory, that should be enough for the game to then recognize they've collected this item. Let's, put a flag in memory. We'll alter this checksum. So now any future games that have that in the memory will know. But it would have been, yes, very clever for Rare to definitely put a trap down and, you levitated over that wall. Well, that's now useless. Enjoy playing the game over again.
Yes, if you use a Game Shark and do the moon jump, and you could actually get the ice key that. I remember people getting the ice key that way. I think before the Sandcastle codes were even in play.
Absolutely. Well, because the other items, and especially the ones that just appear, are, they're not loaded into the game's memory at all. In fact, it was such a tease that anybody that didn't 100% the game and therefore didn't know about anything for Stop N Swop would have organically and naturally come across the ice key because it was hidden behind a wall in Waz's cave. So if you're just a newbie player that managed to fumble your way into Freeze Easy Peak, that's going to be the first item that you actually catch a glance of, a glimpse of through this ice wall. And you'll be like, what's that? How can I get it? Oh, I really want that. And that would entice you to then figure out more about it. And, Banjo-Tooie finally let you get it in theory. So, that's all there. And of course, people modified their games using Game Shark to fly over top that wall and drop down on the other side and got it early. And that was before we knew about codes or anything like that. And even Hyle on his site, he was going around making statements back in those days to give out statements on that stuff to be like, don't do this because it might screw everything up.
Because that's the thing about Stop and Swap. I mentioned the save states on the Nintendo Switch Online version, but that's such a boon for those of us who were cautious back in the day, because this isn't just, I got the ice key on this one save file. It's no, the ice key is then gone for the game for eternity. It's every file, even new ones.
The entire cartridge, yeah.
Yeah. So that's why it was such a big deal. And it's like, are you sure you want to do this?
Which, yeah, absolutely. And that's, it's a valid assertion, but luckily there was nothing in there preventing. It was just the absolute, decline and destruction of Stop and Swap that would have left us away from those anyway. So ultimately it doesn't matter, but yeah. Okay, so where does this go from here? So we know that Banjo-Tooie has nothing in it because it was canceled in Donkey Kong 64 before, that game even released. So the team would have had no time to implement anything from that. And we know, obviously, from this episode insofar, that Banjo-Kazooie can absolutely use those codes. It can receive and output information towards Stop and Swap. But is there a game in Rare's library that came out with some feature, some kind of vestige of Stop and Swap still intact? And the answer is yes. In our second episode, we talked about Donkey Kong 64. And because it was so close to the finish line, because they were almost ready to put it out with Stop and Swap before Nintendo swooped in, unfortunately, with their ultimatum, with that letter, there is stuff that they tried to hide and they roped off, and we're taking peeks behind whether it's a legitimate method or an illegitimate method, but we know that there is stuff hidden in Donkey Kong 64. And those mysteries that we found last time now finally have answers.
Yeah, so this is what's exciting to me. Like, code and whatever, it's not over my head, but it just doesn't fascinate me, right? Because that's just sort of the universe-breaking stuff I don't really like. I really get into the fanciful stuff, Steve. I am a man of magic and mirth. And so what really fascinates me is in the game environment itself, how would Stop and Swap have worked with Donkey Kong 64? And there have been many theories over the years about like what it would actually do, what it would entail. And while we don't have all of the answers, you have been a regular Sherlock in trying to source all available information that is already out there worldwide on this topic. And you have made some startling discoveries that wouldn't have actually been discoveries for people natively of these regions who had access to these publications or materials. It's just, when like, especially in 1999, we were starting to become a more global community, but this is pre-social media. Language barriers were still very much a thing because, translators weren't as efficient or capable as they are now. So there was still this divide, with the English-speaking world or the, German-speaking parts of Europe or, Japan. We kind of like closed off. And so it's fascinating to explore the mysteries of Stop and Swap during this time period because there is stuff that has been overlooked for a long, long time.
Exactly. And just to catch everybody up with the two mysteries, we discussed them in the previous episode, but and I've actually theorized myself on it. I posted on DK Vine forums about, it's called the mystery pillar. And this was something that really confused and kind of mystified the community for a really long time. in the final or the penultimate level, it's right before Hideout Home. There's a level called Creepy Castle in Donkey Kong 64. And I know, Hyle, that I am preaching to the choir right now of all the Kongversation viewers that go, I've played Donkey Kong 64. I've seen the swinging lights and the swinging vines. I know everything about this game. But what they might not have known is that on the other side, in Creepy Castle, it's a haunted level. In the museum, there's a pillar. And it's just set up like a museum. So it's for display. It's to have something on top of it. But in the final game, when people got to that level, they looked through the glass and they said, well, I just see a pillar and there's nothing on this pillar. I don't know what this is intended to do. And it perplexed people so much that people actually wrote into Scribes asking about it, trying to get to the bottom. And Rare's official response, they said, well, it was supposed to be for something. Now it isn't. Put it out of your mind. It's the same way that we had termites originally planned for Fungi Forest and we scrapped that idea in the stump. This is yet another thing where he had an idea for something, then we didn't. Don't worry about it. But you know what? We will worry about it. We'll obsess over it for the next decade and a half or 2 decades now even, because that's what we do. We comb through things. So that was the first iteration that we had this kind of mystery that we didn't know anything about it. So the second mystery was within Crystal Caves. It's level right before Creepy Castle. There's a wall that's very curious, that you can approach as Chunky Kong. And the interesting thing about it is there's a lot of really lofty challenges within Crystal Caves. And the first golden banana that you can get with Chunky Kong is just stepping on a pad, pressing Z, and a banana will just appear. In a level that has you, completing things like Beaver Bother and stuff like that. It seems very hand-wavy. And that confused a lot of people. And I know, Hyle, you don't like the coding stuff, but there's a glitch, within the code of the game that you can really abuse to cause a cutscene to begin early. And the way that this works is you can go through the intro cutscene in the menu for Donkey Kong 64. And if you play that cutscene and it begins, if you can back out of it before the game officially prompts the main menu to stop and the main cutscene to start, so you're kind of in between spaces, once you exit from that menu, you'll notice that the main menu has no sound in it. And the reason that it doesn't have sound in it is because the game logic is basically declaring, okay, he's actually watching the cutscene right now, so we don't want to have the main menu interrupting all this action with, the Kremlings running back and forth and stuff, so let's mute that. So once you've got confirmation that, hey, this music isn't working, you can then go into your file and start manipulating things around the game, because as far as the game knows, oh, this cutscene is still going on, so ignore anything the player does unless they die. Because if they die, then we have to respawn them to the coordinates that they last died in. So if you can die in front of Donkey Kong's treehouse, the game will interrupt its own cutscene at, I believe it's 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You have to get the timing down. It will then say, okay, play a cutscene that has Donkey Kong's treehouse. And funny enough, with Stop N Swop, the first cutscene that Rare put in the memory of Donkey Kong 64 was the cutscene of this camera going through DK's treehouse and landing on the corner of this room. Mm-hmm. And then it fades out. It rather spins out with the Donkey Kong 64 logo and has you reappearing in Crystal Caves, just in front of that kind of weird area that we don't really know anything about. And this is further, what really solidified this is the German version, or the Japanese version rather, on Nintendo's website for Donkey Kong 64, had this great GIF image of Donkey Kong standing in his treehouse, and instead of an empty corner that we have ore or minerals or something in, there's actually a fridge, like a freezer that has Banjo and Kazooie's face on it. So putting those two together, you go, okay, so at one point we were supposed to enter Donkey Kong's treehouse. We were supposed to go maybe inside of this, or maybe just witness it opening maybe. And then we'd be warped to Crystal Caves. Like the camera would just go, have a transition, and then we're standing in front of that wall ready to do something. But from there, we didn't really know what it was meant to do. And of course, the biggest revelation was, hey, in the memory of Donkey Kong 64, there's meant to be the ice key. You were supposed to have collected that item at some point. But of course, in the final version, it's erased right away. And we still have it in the memory, and it still is permanently collected. But there's no transferability from Donkey Kong 64 at that stage from Banjo-Kazooie.
Right.
So those were the two big mysteries that we had in the first game, yeah.
Yeah, and the pillar in Creepy Castle was, I didn't think too much of this back in the day. I definitely never thought, at least back in 1999 or 2000, that it had anything to do with Banjo-Kazooie. Because, this was before Stop N Swop was even known terminology. This was just the ice key and the two eggs we're going to play in a Banjo-Tooie. Like, you weren't even thinking about Donkey Kong 64. So I never put two and two together here, and it's like, oh, the pillar is empty because it obviously was going to hold a secret that you could unlock utilizing Banjo-Kazooie's items. I just thought, oh, it was maybe a golden banana or something that they moved or whatever, like rejiggered. It doesn't really matter. And of course, we had fun with the pillar on DK Vine, where we tricked people into thinking that this is where the scroll of gameplay that Cranky snarkily mentions in the instruction manual would actually be located. Not, people didn't realize that was just Cranky's humor saying you needed to find the scroll of gameplay because the gameplay was so poor. But you'll never find it because the gameplay is so poor. But people think, oh, that's an actual item to find in Donkey Kong 64. So, you crude Photoshop of, I think, something from Zelda Ocarina of Time on there. It looks like a scroll. A scroll of gameplay.
I think the dungeon map, yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of our little contribution to the urban legends of that time. But yeah, the pillar... I never really got worked up about the pillar. For whatever reason, the mysteries of Crystal Caves, which aren't as apparent, something read as wrong to me immediately with Crystal Caves. Like, just the whole vibe of it was almost screaming to me, there should be something here and there's not. And I don't know why that was, why I was really picking up on that. But it was this kind of sixth sense that I had back in the day that I just couldn't shake, that there was something going on. Of course, I saw that early screenshot of the Banjo-Kazooie freezer or refrigerator or whatever you want to define it as. People call it a shower stall. I don't think it's a shower stall. I think it has to do with the ice key. But I remember seeing that and being like conscious of the fact that they changed it before release. And it was just like, well, that's weird. Why did they change that? Oh, well, I guess it doesn't matter. And I guess in the back of my head, in my subconscious, maybe I was putting the pieces together, but I just couldn't see the full picture.
And that's, as far as I go into it, unfortunately with me, and I think one of the things, actually, the reason that you might have had that feeling about Crystal Caves is as you approach the wall in Crystal Caves, the camera does this weird spin where it totally looks like you should be able to carry on, and there's nothing there. It's just like, look at this wall! And you're like, it's a wall. I've seen those many, many times in Donkey Kong 64.
Right.
So it could have been kind of that hint there, maybe, but it is a very mysterious level, as you say, and I can totally relate with the pillar because it's just one of those mysteries there that, even in my playing of Donkey Kong 64, I passed that hundreds of times without ever thinking about it. And of course, I posted on Donkey Kong or on TKU a theory of mine going, is this potentially one of the places where a Stop N Swop egg was supposed to appear? We'd have a Stop N Swop egg appear on this pillar. It's kind of similar in Banjo-Kazooie where you have the ice key, so you have this wall that you can see through and an item that's very tantalizing that you can't get. So, maybe there's something there, but that's as far as I went with it. And it was concrete that, well, it's going to be an item that's exclusive to Banjo-Kazooie. It's going to be an egg. It's going to be a key. It's going to be something of that. And of course, I couldn't have been more wrong. So
it makes sense that it would have at one point in development held something significant, because I don't even think I realized this, but if you look up above the pillar, there is one of those aforementioned swinging lamps right above it, as if to say, like, hey, this right here, it is important. Like, we're going to shine a light on this pillar, with one of our fancy, heaving lamps, that Donkey Kong 64 is so known for. But yeah, I mean, it's actually surprising how simple it was for you to figure this out, Steve. And when I say simple, it still required a lot of legwork and financial contributions, I guess, on your part. But it was right in front of us the whole time. But I would have never thought, oh, I should really investigate foreign players' guides to figure out if anything got published before the deadline, before Rare could let everyone know, hey, this is no longer going to factor into the game?
So, yeah, for what Hyle's alluding to here, there's a website that's absolutely brilliant. It's called archive.org. I've actually used it a lot on the old Rareware site to kind of check out all the old renders they used to upload, the scribes and things like that. It's brilliant for something called the Wayback Machine. And the other thing that people do, especially, nerdy people like us, we love seeing old Rare games from the past, old renders, old strategy guides. And there's people all over the world that are contributing things like, these old Nintendo Power magazines and stuff like that to upload to bring to a wider community. So we were actually very fortunate in that there was a scanner named ScanDull-D, so scan for scanning, dull, so it's like Scandal, and then DE for Germany, for Deutschland, right? And he managed to upload a German version of the Donkey Kong 64 Player's Guide up to archive.org. So I was able to click through and check that out. And both, I think Hyle and I can totally relate to this. Like, when Rare would ship out these renders to different magazines, some would use them and some wouldn't. Some would go, oh, we have enough, area on this page to put this Tiny Kong render here, and we'll flip it over and put this chunky one over there. And other players or other magazine manufacturers around the world would decide to change up the template and everything like that for their composition. So if you look at old strategy guides in different languages, if you're geeky and nerdy like us, which I, strongly encourage, you'll find these really hidden secret renders that were never meant to be seen by your American or Canadian eyes. It's fantastic checking that out. So I was looking through this Donkey Kong 64 Player's Guide thinking, oh, this is fantastic. Like, I'm already about 30 pages in. I'm already seeing all these, renders that we've only maybe seen on Rare's website or the Japanese version of Donkey Kong 64. And of course, in those days, you had to make every, kilobyte count. So they were often uploaded as GIF images. So there's less color. They're all shrunken and compressed and, very pixelated. So just seeing a new render where it's blown up and it's full scale and you're going, oh, fantastic. I can see every, bit of this render that, would have been silicon based for the machine there. It's excellent. And then I came across something very, very curious on page 71. So I flip over and I check out Crystal Caves, and I'm looking at the map here, and I go, well, this is interesting because they're simply sharing resources between Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Europe, and I assume that Nintendo of Japan's the same way. They're all kind of making their own guides at the same time.
Yeah.
But there's something odd about Crystal Caves because in the area where usually we have just a circular room, the German version of Donkey Kong 64 has a room carrying on from that. So it's another square, almost closet-like area that appears there. So all of a sudden I'm thinking, okay, hold on. This was very close to the end of Donkey Kong 64's release, and they probably told Nintendo of America to take it out. But that message maybe wasn't translated to German in time. Or maybe even Japanese. So at that point I get very excited, and I'm clicking through, because now I'm trying to get to Creepy Castle, because I think, hey, if they've actually altered this for the American version, if we got this Stalin-esque, erasing from history, this never existed thing, maybe we have this preserved as well in Creepy Castle. And sure enough, once I turn to that page to reach Creepy Castle in 81, I go, first of all, they have a pillar, which is different from our guide, because our guide, it completely erased the existence of the pillar even. But more exciting than that, there's a golden Donkey Kong statue, like a bust, on top of this pillar. So we now have final confirmation. This is what was supposed to be on that pillar. And I've looked through the entire guide. Those are the only two changes from the American version and the European version for Germany, is that we have an extra room in Crystal Caves, and we have an extra Donkey Kong golden statue that we would have been able to collect in Creepy Castle.
Yeah, so this is like a squat, like, almost, exaggerated bust of Donkey Kong. And Steve, I know you don't play games that Rare didn't have any hand in, so you'll have to trust me on this. But it reminds...
There's other companies?
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of some of the stuff you would see in the temple stages of Donkey Kong Country Returns, sort of the ancient iconography of Donkey Kong Island established by Retro, presumably by the Tiki Tak tribe, which were... It's assumed to be ancient Kongs themselves. So these like representations of what looks like Donkey Kong, but might be great ancestors of Donkey Kong, but it looks almost exactly like that. It brings to mind immediately sort of the little details you'll see in DKC Returns. And yeah, I was like, oh my God, like this was going to be on the pillar. And presumably it was going to be a collectible object, but how you would have obtained it would have probably been rooted in Stop N Swop.
Absolutely. So as soon as I saw that, I posted on Twitter. It was on June 10th of 2022. And I just grabbed screenshots of both the area in the American guide and the German guide. And I just posted them both going, here's the area. Here's the Creepy Castle and Crystal Caves. There it is right there. And immediately I drove to Amazon to their page and just went, I need this copy of this guide immediately. Ordered it in. It came to my house. I'm looking in it and I'm going, okay, it's not a forgery. It's not a fake. He scanned it literally. This is as it should be. And then from there, I got into some very foolish financial choices because I decided, hey, if the German version of Donkey Kong 64 guide is different than the American, then perhaps the Japanese version has their own ARM, and perhaps we can find more information in that guide there. So completely going for broke because I can't understand a word or a kanji of Japan. I just type in Donkey Kong 64 guide into Google Translate. I put it over to to Japanese. I put that into eBay on, ebay.jp, and a bunch of guides come up. And of course, I don't know the contents. I don't know what is in. So I saw the first three and it just went, buy this, buy that, buy that. So all three came relatively at the same time. And I looked through the first one and it was all hand-drawn maps. So I went, you're useless. You came out a year after and you hand-drew everything. Throw you to the side. I grabbed the second guide.
Wait, Steve. These were unofficial guides then.
Yes, unfortunately so, because the unofficial kanji is probably something that would have detected me if I could speak the language, but unfortunately, I'm just going with what I got, so I'm looking through it.
And can I just say that these were like the absolute, pardon my language here, dog shit of the player's guide libraries of this era, because you would get these unofficial guides that would get everything wrong and they wouldn't be able to use official artwork at all. So you would get these abstractions. And I mean, the biggest sinner of the bunch, I would say, I forget which company it was that did the Diddy Kong Racing Guide here in the States, that the unofficial Diddy Kong Racing Guide, where they said that Banjo was a hound dog. So, that's just about as bad as that unofficial guide to Mario that was just published to tie in with the Super Mario Brothers movie, where they gave little biographies on various characters, and Diddy Kong was included under current babies. And it said that Diddy was first introduced in 1982's Donkey Kong 2, but wasn't named until 1994's Donkey Kong Country. I can't really decide which is the more egregious error of the two, Banjo the Hound Dog or all of that mess, but I hate them both. Anyway, continue.
So yeah, the second guide, much of the same, better quality maps, but it was released in the year 2000. So it wasn't made during the production of 64. A lot of these magazines were rather reactionary. So They would grab an official guide, copy all the work, and then just try and, as you said, they hand draw it. So it's very unofficial.
Which is wild because, a lot of these unofficial guides, they would at the very least have press copies or, something of the game itself where they are able to get out in front as much as possible, have it on shelves. But these are just reactionary. They're basically just like us. Regular folk who are just, getting these materials as they actually release the stores, and then they're scrambling to come up with their own rip-off versions. It's fascinating to me.
Exactly. So with those two there, I mean, it's the unofficial guides that I'm looking through. And by the third magazine, I'm now feeling kind of queasy because I'm like, man, did I just waste a lot of yen trying to get these, guides to my house here? But luckily, the final guide, that was like opening up the golden ticket for Willy Wonka, it had Crystal Caves intact. It was actually an isometric view, so you kind of saw it from the top side, kind of like Night Lore.
Isometric view.
There you go. Yeah, ukulele. So it was an isometric view like that, and it showed the dimensions of the cave. So now we know exactly how high it would have been. It's a closet-sized thing, so it wouldn't have continued up like an elevator. You can never tell with the Nintendo-produced guides because it was all from the top down. So this guy actually gave us dimension for it. It would have, followed everything like that. But the more enticing thing about the Japanese version is that they actually didn't delete the text that they were referring to with their guide. So if we look at in terms of censorship, how effective each region was. In America, they were completely Stalin-esque. They went, we're going to get rid of any text. We're going to get rid of any image. We're actually going to go above and beyond so much. We delete the pillar that should be in the guide because we're just going to go for broke and delete so much anyway that it was a complete removal. If you were an American viewer reading, or American reader rather, viewing this magazine, you would have no indication whatsoever that anything was hidden.
Today in America, they just get rid of the books entirely.
Exactly. Yeah. So the second guide in Europe, they were partially effective, that they got rid of all the text. So anything alluding to that golden Donkey Kong trophy, completely missing. The ice key had the dimensions, but no indication of what was there. The difference was the Japanese guys left that in. So even though the Japanese guide doesn't have the golden trophy, they must have got to that in time just because it was physical there. The Crystal Cave's origin point for that chamber has a arrow pointing toward it with an image of Chunky Kong. And luckily for them, they were able to come in there and go, hey, Rare is not going to put this in the game anymore, so we need to replace the image of Chunky at this wall. And funny enough, they just replaced it with a picture of Chunky at a wall. And it still has the text there, so you go, what are you showing me exactly? Because this doesn't make any sense. And, it's par for the course because they went, we're just getting rid of it. We'll replace the image and everything, but not the text. And if you read it, if you can translate the text, which a few users on Twitter were very helpful with this, and Google Translate as well through their Lens program, it says, a mysterious item? ! Underneath it says, I can't see inside, but it certainly feels like something should be in there. When will it open? And then there's a little bit of text underneath that says, could Chunky punch through this? Kind of saying like, the previous area, there was an ice wall that Chunky could push through. But of course, with this one here, it would have been reliant on Banjo-Kazooie. You wouldn't have been able to get anywhere with it, but they just kind of made an allusion to it. So that would have been the huge blocked icy cave with a keyhole as described in the patent that we ended up getting in 2004. So I'm assuming it would have been this large icy door in place of that wall with a keyhole, and we couldn't see through it. It was an opaque surface, and they were just teasing in the guide, going, hey, something's beyond here. There's something mysterious here, but you won't be able to get it yet.
For those questioning the player's guides not coming out and saying this is how you do it, because isn't that what player's guides are supposed to do? Keep in mind that here in the States, the Nintendo Power produced Banjo-Kazooie Player's Guide never made any reference to the ice key or anything else. It never even came up on the last page of the guide. It just completely ignored everything. And this is when Stop N Swop was in play. So that level of hinting, of teasing is more than we ever got on this side of the Pacific.
And even to kind of, backpack on to Banjo-Kazooie. With the maps there, they didn't ever show Waz's Cave as a map. They showed the honeycomb, like the empty honeycomb piece that you were supposed to get in that level, but they never outright said, here's a map of it, because then, of course, they would have to draw the ice key. They'd have to show that secret area. So there could have been in place something like that where they were avoiding it, or they're just lazy. One of the two.
It's funny, though, because like Ray Day said in the call that's what really brought them online in the first place, was searching for answers for all of this. And it's not quite as linear for me, but it definitely was what really got me first dipping my toes in the online video game fandom in the summer of 98. It's how I found Rare's website, which had just launched a couple months prior. And because I was like, the player's guide doesn't say anything about this, and there was some third-party video game magazine at the time that I don't think it was in publication for too long, but the author of the article for Banjo-Kazooie brought all of this stuff up and was like, I don't know, do you have any answers? And they provided their email address, so I emailed them, and I was like, hey, I'm wondering this too. Have you found out anything since this magazine went to print? And they've actually responded and said, no. And so it was kind of the first taste I had of like communicating with people online about Banjo-Kazooie, about Rare, about the DKU. It was enthralling. It was I felt so empowered, even though I had no answers. So it was just it was a wild time for those who weren't there, who didn't experience it as the game was brand new. It was this captivating mystery that, had we known it actually extended into Donkey Kong 64 of all things, I think that would have just melted our little faces off. But alas, we had no idea at the time. But so yeah, Steve, like, what are your theories then on how this connects to the pillar in Creepy Castle? Because if the pillar has this golden Donkey Kong statue, well, how does that relate to this ice, like locked ice door in Crystal Caves?
So, as I said before, those are the only two areas that are removed entirely from the American version to the German version. So, I'm making the assumption there they must have something to do. And because Rare has said on their site, this was to do something that we planned and then we didn't do it, that's obviously referring to Stop and Swap. So, looking at those two things together, what I'm assuming during play, what would happen is you would enter the museum, usually as you do, as Chunky Kong, and you would try and go for his golden banana, which is at the very end of the level. And you would pass this museum window. And in our version of the game, there's a warp pad that Tiny Kong can use to get into that room. Mm-hmm. But it's much like the Ice Key, where you would see a wall of glass and then a pillar with something on it that you'd obviously want to get. It's very tantalizing. You go, ooh, I'm already collecting golden bananas. I really want this golden trophy. And I believe at the time, either you might not have been able to get it. The other odd thing is, too, there's a purple balloon on the German guide, which means you could go into that room. So they had something there, whether they were going to keep that balloon hostage unless you could stop and swap, or even if the golden pillar might have been an NPC. Because if you can get here, surely you'd be able to collect it. But if it's speaking to you and maybe giving you instruction on how you're supposed to get Stop and Swap done, that could be a thing there. The problem is, as much evidence as we have toward these things actually existing, we don't know the functionality of them. So there's a lot of guesswork there saying, is this a collectible item? Is this an NPC? Could you get behind this wall? I would like to think that you couldn't. My gut instinct tells me, even though there's that purple balloon there, that you would go into this area, you would see that statue, go, I really want to get that. This is just like that damn ice key in Banjo-Kazooie that I can't get either. I'm frustrated. I want to find some answers. And like Hyle said, you wax nostalgic going, I went on the internet. I checked it out. And to that point, they might have said, oh, you're going to need to get the ice key to do this step and then, get into the museum to get the golden statue. And perhaps the wall would be missing once you got the, whatever reward was in that cave. So, these things all add up to each other. It's a wild goose chase of one thing leading on to the next, as Stop and Swap is. But as far as we know now, those two places in Donkey Kong 64 would have been entirely dependent on Stop and Swap. And to that point as well, we don't know if just Banjo and just Donkey Kong would have been enough. We don't know if you would have just gone from Banjo-Kazooie to Donkey Kong, get the ice key that way, go forth and solve it. You might have had to wait an extra year on top of that for Banjo-Tooie to come out to even get the ice key. So, we can speak about, what points you believe on that, whether we would have had to wait, or do you think they would have been outright with it in Donkey Kong 64?
Well, yeah, what's crazy to me is, because I'm thinking, okay, so what if, because this golden Kong statue feels very much like the ice key or the eggs, in that it feels like this wouldn't necessarily be the reward for everything. What if you are then supposed to take the golden Kong statue into another game? and it just continued this madness where, we've in our heads limited Stop and Swap to the ice key and the 6 eggs. What if each game was then to introduce their own, at the very least, one Stop and Swap item that would be thrown into the pot? So it wouldn't just be the items from Banjo-Kazooie. It would then be the golden Kong statue and I don't even know what you would have in Perfect Dark or Dinosaur Planet or whatever games would have been roped into this. But that is just so tantalizing to me because, it's literally burned onto my t-shirt that I'm wearing right now. Like the holy iconography of Stop and Swap. What if there were more though? And it wasn't just what related to Banjo-Kazooie? What if, here's the Donkey Kong item. Here's the Perfect Dark item. Here's the Conquer item. Here's the Dinosaur Planet item. Maybe here's the Banjo-Tooie item that's wholly unique for Banjo-Tooie. Like that is just, like, that is the next level, Steve. Like, we are so far beyond where we were before. Now we're talking about, like, all new objects.
Well, and that also indicates, too, we know what was supposed to be on the pillar, and we know that there was supposed to be an ice door that we unlock with the ice key. That all checks out. But what do you think was behind the ice key door?
Well, so the thing about Stop and Swop that we have to really come to terms with is, even as we peel back the layers of these eggs, and we learn that it went so far beyond what we initially thought. Ultimately, the resolution, the rewards for all of this were a little bit more muted than we imagined back in the summer of 1998, because we are, of course, picturing the secret world in Banjo-Kazooie, the lava world, or Hammerhead Beach, something like that. But it was never going to be that grand. It was going to be basically what Banjo-Tooie gave us. Here is this little cosmetic tweak to Kazooie. She can now breathe fire. Here are these little codes, throwaway codes that you can get. It was never going to be as ridiculous as our fevered imaginations sort of imagine it to be. So I can't imagine that behind this ice key door in Crystal Caves, it would have been something so terrific that, it would completely change the landscape to Donkey Kong 64. It might have been something as simple as, this is how you unlock Crusher in multiplayer.
That could be. Yeah, that's the thing about Stop and Swap too. We're kind of led by the hand by Rare as well, because they do like to mock us. Let's be honest, with our theories and fandom is nothing bullshit.
They did it in Grab by the Ghoulies, right? Like,
absolutely, yeah, whole secret level, yeah.
Yeah, the chalkboard in Grab by the Ghoulies is in no way representative of their actual plans for Stop and Swap. That was all just a red herring after the fact.
Yeah, and with that too, like, we've been led astray so many times that it does kind of, muddy the waters for any kind of speculation. But as you said, it could very well be Crusher or, another cosmetic change within Donkey Kong 64. I know in the first episode, we discussed the possibility of what if you could play as these different connectable characters. What if you could be Donkey Kong in Banjo-Tooie, or what if you could be Banjo in Donkey Kong 64? I think that's because the other teams would have been kind of involved in this process. I think that's probably an accurate theory, or if not, just, wishful thinking. I ended up posting on the forums for DK Vine of, my perfect Stop and Swap theory. And of course, as we discussed in the former episode, we had a caller call in that said, I think it was Don Tessier, that, he had this great theory about, Captain Blubber in Jolly Roger's Lagoon, and he went off and paragraphs of information. And then, of course, everybody called him an idiot, and they said, it's not this, we know what Stop and Swap is. But I mean, there is a certain point where fanciful thinking does have to kind of take over between this bit of logic and hardened fact, Like, I'm saying this even knowing that there's evidence in the magazine and everything that I've found in German. It's like, well, it doesn't particularly solve a scenario. It just gives us the next step. And your imagination just takes over from there. So although there isn't a cyan egg in Creepy Castle, there's a golden Donkey Kong trophy in Creepy Castle. So it gives us that next step of, well, what does that do then? And I've done my due diligence trying to interview, a lot of former Rare employees and stuff. And I've reached out to Kev Bayless, even Tim Stamper I've reached out to, embarrassingly enough, to being like, please, but I haven't gotten any answer from him, unfortunately. But even with Kev Bayless, he was very nice to, get me in touch with Mark Stevenson and stuff, just to kind of discuss the levels, cause he was the designer of the levels and stuff like that. But even then they're looking at it like, we can't remember because it was 25 years ago, near or less, like it's 23. So I can't fault them for not remembering, because it was something that was almost in it, then it wasn't, and then 25 years have passed. So if only we'd found the magazine sooner.
That's the sickness of all of this, isn't it, Steve? Because to us, this is basically the holy words of God, right? Like we hang on every aspect of all of this. Whereas to them, I mean, it still means a great deal to the people who worked on these games, obviously, but they don't remember it as well as we do. It's like when people, quote something from the Kongversation to me from a few years ago, and I struggle to recall it because to me it was just another episode, like I'm sorry, I don't remember that. So I think the closer you get to the creative process of anything, the harder it is to retain details. Whereas if you're an observer on the outside and you're really into it, then it's easier to absorb everything and to know it with encyclopedic knowledge. And the passage of time will continue to dull their memories when it comes to all of this. I'm surprised Paul Makachek remembers as much as he does. I know he was the primary architect of Stop and Swap, at least, getting the ball rolling or eggs rolling or what have you.
Or even being able to salvage that document, too, from that fax. I mean, those things should just be incinerated or grinded up by the end of the year. It's from 1999, but he was able to find it within the archives, which is amazing,
Well, another frustrating thing about all of this is, the golden Kong statue on the pillar in Creepy Castle is so tantalizing. And then, of course, as I brought up, well, we know what 6 games were planned initially to be involved in the Stop and Swap process. And we speculated on the past episodes about what those 6 games could be. But that was at the outset of Stop and Swap in 1998. Things quickly evolved behind the scenes at Rare as, by the time we got to Donkey Kong 64, which was supposed to have been the second game to be involved in the process, that's where it got cut off dead. And so we can, go back to 1998 and say, well, what would have been the items then in 12 Tales Conquer 64 or Perfect Dark or Dinosaur Planet? But the truth of the matter is they never got that far thinking about it to ever actually conceive anything. So it's just within the realm of speculation and hypothesis. We'll never actually know because there's not actually an answer. Not at least, in this timeline, in this universe.
Now, having said that though, should we then go back to kind of what we know in Donkey Kong 64? Because we have all these pieces that are half finished that we do know a plan of how they were going to work. Should we kind of walk the viewers through what was intended, knowing what's in the memory, what's being searched for?
Yeah, absolutely, because I don't even know what you're talking about right now.
Sorry, we've kind of skipped over it, but so we know that there's a shower in DK's treehouse. We know there's a door in Crystal Caves, and we know that there's, a trophy that somehow was supposed to play into this. And we know now, of course, that Banjo-Kazooie scans and checks memories. So if Banjo-Tooie wasn't factored into this yet, if it was completely unlockable from Banjo-Kazooie to Donkey Kong 64, this is the proposed solution of what would actually work, right? You would start up Donkey Kong 64. It's all detailed in the patent that you would go into that cave and you would find a lever. Here's the gap. We don't know whether it would have been a literal lever or something would have happened. But anyways, a flag would have been written to memory that would have allowed you to come back to the ice key in Banjo-Kazooie. It would have written down 010E. Or sorry, that's the code. Yeah, 010E. That would have been the ice key. So you rip out Donkey Kong 64. You put in Banjo-Kazooie. You go to Freeze Easy Peak. And now that tantalizing ice key that you watched for a year at this point, instead of 20 years for us, like you would have seen the ice key there obtainable. You would have grabbed it. It would have been screaming, of course, the address back to memory.
It would have been, let me just clarify here. The ice in Waz's cave would have vanished because you pulled a lever in Donkey Kong 64.
As far as we know from the patent, yes.
Okay.
It would have been broken. So there would have been a shattering. It still would have had the same thing as the codes. So you'd grab the ice key in the level there. It would scream back 0106 to then tell Donkey Kong 64, hey, this key is ready to be grabbed and utilized in Donkey Kong 64. You would then start up Donkey Kong 64. What I'm assuming would happen, they found a cutscene that they've since uploaded to YouTube on this unused cutscene compilation of Crystal Caves coming into view in that door where it would have been, and then it would have faded out. So that would have been the first indication that, hey, you should go check this out. This is kind of interesting. At that point, you would have gone to Crystal Caves, you would have used the ice key to unlock the door, collected who knows what, And at that point, as soon as you collected that item, it would have played that cutscene in Donkey Kong 64 of the shower door opening up. It would have then taken you back to Crystal Caves, where you were then encouraged, hey, just like we showed you this cutscene of this opening up here, we're now showing you a cutscene of what's now impacted and changed from the environment there. You would then go back to Donkey Kong's treehouse, and at that point, your imagination can run wild. We don't know. I've speculated, you go in the shower and it's like a transformation, like a Mumbo transformation. The door shuts, or not a shower, a freezer, whatever. It opens up and then now you're another character and now you can run around and play as this character kind of thing like that. But for what we know, that's the intended function of Donkey Kong 64. We just don't know that one last crucial piece of what it actually would have changed in the environment. And hey, it might have been Crusher. Who knows? Like we don't know that fact.
As tantalizing as it is to imagine Banjo and Kazooie popping out of that freezer or shower stall or whatever and be like, oh, we're in this game now. Let's go. That's almost as unlikely as the entrance to the lava world rising up in the lava chamber in Grunty's lair. That's
absolutely
that's pretty fanciful thinking, especially because that would just completely break Donkey Kong 64, a game that's already pretty broken as is.
But it would help the DKU. I mean, if we're playing Jet Force characters in DK64, that sorts that out.
But here's the thing, Steve. Once again, I have to point out that it is very unlikely that Jet Force was ever supposed to play a part in any of this.
That is very true.
It came out right before all of this drama with DK64 happened. So if there was any stop and swap functionality in Jet Force, it would have already been found.
Exactly. And with that one, in that case specifically too, I think the idea was, hey, we're going to also put Stop and Swap in Jet Force. Oh, it's already out. It was very close to it where they went, no, there's no time. All right, DK64 is going to be our start. But yeah, what an absolutely insane rabbit hole that we've had for the past 23 years, huh?
Yeah. And it just really, as much as I want to, dive into Conker's Bad Fur Day. I know, Conker's Bad Fur Day, as it stands, would have never played a part in Stop and Swap, given how squeamish Nintendo already was about having this M-rated game. Hey kids, guess what? You can connect it to Donkey Kong 64. That's right. You'll get all sorts of good stuff if you connect Conker's Bad Fur Day to Donkey Kong 64 and Banjo-Kazooie. What?
So hide it from your parents.
Tim Stamper's been teasing his working cartridge of 12 Tales Conker 64 on social media. And I'm just like, oh, what would Conker have had? Would it have been the golden acorn?
There you go.
Or the Stop and Swap egg that appears in Nabnut's room. Oh, what if you took that egg into Conker? Your mind plays all sorts of tricks on you. Plus, of course, there's the question of the ice key. If you use the ice key in Donkey Kong 64, well, Banjo-Kazooie promised that you'd use the ice key in Banjo-Tooie. So would the ice key just be this perpetual item that all of the characters of Rare and the DKU would just be passing around to each other? Because that's the biggest sticking point for me with the ice key being used in Donkey Kong 64 is, but would it have also been used in Banjo-Tooie? Or would the ice key have been the thing that's used between all of the games? And then, the little items that are unique to each character, like the question mark eggs or the golden Kong statue, maybe that would have been the unique elements from each game. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's, you mentioned the rabbit hole. That's what I find myself questioning now that we have all of this new evidence brought to light.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Yeah. We never get solutions. We just get steps.
Yeah. Which is what makes this such a fascinating topic to discuss all of these years later. I mean, 25 years almost we've been discussing Stop and Swap. That is just ridiculous. A quarter of a century. Do you know, Steve, that 25 years before Banjo-Kazooie came out, it was 1973. Just to put it into perspective of how long we've been discussing Stop and Swap.
Well, and it's insane too, because you look at the Banjo-Kazooie series as it stands, they're very realistic with their timeline. You know, if you go in Granny's Revenge, they get you back to the 1970s. You know, they have a timeline that way. And canonically, they say, well, this is 2008. It's been exactly 10 years since the original Banjo, and Banjo-Tooie comes out 2 years later. They go, it's literally been 2 years. So it's insane to think that if they were to make a Banjo today, their time travel for exactly how long to go back to Granny's Revenge is what would happen in the original Banjo.
Yeah.
It's like, what is time? Why is it like this?
So I guess that is everything that is now on the table, Nabnut's table or any other table. So what are our final thoughts thus far for Stop and Swap? Because I'm sure the future will reveal something else. Some new piece of information will be brought to light, either from Paul Makachek or another Rare dev, present or past, or we will find some other piece of published media somewhere across the globe that hints at something else. But where can we end things right now? Because this episode will go up about 6 days before Easter, a time where people
Hidden eggs, yeah.
around the world, search for eggs hidden in their yards or their houses. And so what message can you give to all the little children hunting for eggs?
So, you know, it's like finding an Easter egg that's 20 years too late and it's just in your room that you never found when you were 10. And then it's there and it's expired and it's no good, but you go, I can finally solve that mystery, you know, because the end of Stop and Swap, like every single episode we've done for this series so far, we've always concluded, and it's a fool's errand because we always say, and that's everything we know about Stop and Swap. And of course, the first episode ends. 2 days later, Paul Makachek comes out and goes, now I'm going to change your world. So we update that and we go, all right, second episode, we now have a couple more hours. And that's the end of Stop and Swap. And then, of course, I go on archive.org and I find a German strategy guide, and that creates this episode. So I don't think it's safe for us right now, Hyle, to say this is the end of it, because what will happen in 2025? You know, like it's going to be continuously going. There's always new stuff to find. And on that note, too, what can be found now? And I'm thinking back to Banjo-Kazooie, and I'm thinking, surely, if it's all planned out with post-it notes and pages, because Greg Mayles has shown us, you know, on Twitter, the various things that he's created for Ghoulies and Banjo-Tooie and Banjo-Kazooie. So surely there is a document, a piece of paper with marker that's drawn out that shows the exact plan, or at least a piece of the puzzle that would have had Banjo kind of cooperating with it. So that is something that maybe we can hopefully look forward to if Twitter doesn't explode. You know, if we can have a direct link to him still years from now, maybe he'll bless us on this Easter. It'll be an Easter miracle, and he'll post a scanned piece of Banjo-Kazooie that will show us, you know, a piece of Stop and Swap's intended purpose.
Well, I think I know a way we can guarantee that we'll learn more information.
And how's that?
By me saying, and that's all we know about Stop and Swap.
This has been a File 2 production.
Qué rico.